I think, tripled our capacity from 9,000 to about 25,000 in 20 years. 500% increase. Projected to be around now, I think 29,000. When I took over, around 24,000. I think the count on Monday was 19,627. I always know the count, so that's down. But we're just getting started. I mean, we're looking at a second bite of the apple here. Our emissions are down. We're down a lot on the emissions. Our recidivism rate, which is 3 years coming back to prison, so you got to do a 3-year look back. We used to be in 2009, we were at 26.6%. Now we're at 22.7%. Why is that important? Well, with closing 7 institutions, we've averted, for the people that like saving tax dollars, we've averted almost $491 million in costs. It's building new prisons, it's hiring new officers. Just with the prisoners we have now, it's mental health, it's feeding, it's clothing, it's all that stuff. It's very expensive, and to build a prison is extremely expensive. One of the other things that we've done is our youthful offender officers. Youthful offender officers are youthful offenders, 18 to 25-year-olds. 50% recidivism rate. We're coming back to prison 50%. Complete failure. And it's just complete failure. Just every other one, you're coming back. And when you come back, you're coming back for probably a new crime, and you're coming back for a lot longer. So Judge Byers, who took over before me, did a great job, and he took a giant risk, because this is 18 to 25. That is a population that still has not matured mentally and physically. They're still maturing. And as we read in the paper, that's generally when we read, and I would see most of your clients are in that bracket, actually. It's a problem. So Judge Byers went to the legislature, and he got legislation passed. Now the recidivism rate is 22.9%. So it's come way down. Started, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. And what it is they have now youthful offender officers. So they come in, they get an assessment. You're going to hear a lot about talks about assessment, and that's what everybody's talking about. What are your needs? What will make you not go back to prison? Do you need a job? Do you need education? Do you need to be held responsible? They're not the triple P officers with the gun and the badge. They're more of a mentor. We have someone there that if they do fail, and some do fail, that those folks will take them back to prison. They'll get a warrant to go back to prison. But they're held accountable. They have to get a job. They have to go to school. They have to do things like that. If they don't, and they're not meeting those standards, then they come back to prison and finish their sentence. But if they do, they can work their way out of the sentence. And these, I call them mentors, they will be there for the rest of their lives. You can look around our communities and you can see the kids without the mentors. You can see someone that's not going to hold them accountable, that's not going to hold them responsible. And guess who's going to be there for some of those kids? The gangs. They're going to come right in. You'll hear Amy Barks talk about that later. I went and we actually are leasing, I think she's a pretty good negotiator, for $1 a year, our prison at Coastal that we're not using anymore, and we're turning it into a rehabilitation center. That's another benefit of PEW. So I sat down with those guys that had gone to federal prison for some pretty heavy drugs and gangs, and I said, what happened? And they said, well, my older brother and my cousin had the girls, had the money, had the cars, and I wanted to be like them, so they talked to me. They kind of recruited them. So we're out there recruiting against them, and it's working. 22%, these folks hopefully will never come back to prison. They'll get their education, which is important. Our average education in prison is 10th grade. That's important. If you don't graduate high school, your chances of going to prison, I don't have the exact numbers, but average education in prison is 10th grade. Other things that we're doing with the second bite of the apple of the sentencing reform is we're looking at drug courts. Drug courts work. At a court, I think in Lexington, the number last time I saw this is a while ago, was 90% success rate. Folks are held accountable, they show up, there's graduated responses, which is exactly what we do with the youthful offender. It's much better for these folks. I wish I could say drugs were not as prevalent in prison as they are on the street. That's not true. They're there. We see it. The papers cover it, the TV covers it. They're sneaking them in, they're flying them with drones, they're throwing them over, they're doing everything they can to get the drugs into prison. And with the cell phone, now they're able to coordinate it better and pay for it. I could spend a couple hours on the cell phone in prison, but I won't. Mental health courts. Judge McCullough in Columbia is doing mental health courts. Just like Christy said, there are folks that have interactions with law enforcement who are better treated by mental health folk. If they come to prison, when I took over, I think we had, was it one psychiatrist or psychologist? One, two, we had two, okay. Now we have 10 or 11, so that's a lot better. When I took over 3 years ago, we had 2 for about 23,000 people. And I think we had, the population now with identified mental health orders is, as of this month, 3,359. So it's a pretty good percentage of our population with just 2 people that are there to treat them. Trying to do better on that, but a lot of these folks can be diverted. You call them diversionary courts, and they work. The drug courts work, the mental health courts work. So a couple of my asks would be, Lieber's not far, McDougal's not far. How many veterans do we have in the room? All right, we've got 10% of our population that are veterans. And y'all know the folks that have gone and fought for this country. There are things that happen when you're in war, post-traumatic stress and things, and you come back, and some veterans come back and they're just not the same. And we've seen, they're not getting the treatment that they deserve at our VAs and stuff, and they're trying to fix that. But some of those folks end up in the criminal justice system. I don't want to say it's no fault of their own, but it's because of their sacrifice that allows us to be here today. So I opened up a veterans dorm at McDougal. We have folks there with other veterans trying to rehabilitate them. So any veterans in the room, if you want to volunteer, McDougal's not that far. I would encourage you all to go up and volunteer. Allendale is a character institution. It's a better living institution. You go into Allendale or you go into other prisons that have character dorms. You have to apply, and it's self-paced, and the older guys, the kind of peer-to-peer stuff. These folks, sometimes, they're not going to listen to me. They're not going to listen to Chrissy. They may not listen to you, but they're going to listen to a peer, because they're going to look at them and say, you've been where I've been. And they're going to hold them accountable. If I kind of try to talk to someone, well, you don't know the shoes I walked in, but if it's a peer-to-peer thing. So that's what the character dorms. Allendale, not that far from here, they've got a very robust volunteer program, but the entire prison is a character prison, and it works great. It's safe, and they're learning a lot of stuff. Anybody that sees young people around, become a mentor. It's so important. These folks have a positive influence. It is so important. They need someone to hold them accountable, and they need someone to listen to them, and they don't need someone to pray on. If you see our correctional officers, please thank them. They work very hard, as I said. Their pay was really low. We've increased it now. I mean, our level 3s up at Lieber, and we can go volunteer at Lieber too. Lieber needs a lot of help, a lot of volunteers. They're getting paid more, and I'm going to ask for more. If you can talk to your legislator with the DUE program at Manning and now at Camille for the female prison, like I said, it's working. I mean, it will pay for itself. I've asked the governor's office for more money to do these programs, these pre-release programs at all our prisons, because before, again, we were just releasing people. We've seen it work. If we can hook them up with DUE, everybody that leaves, and I won't forget this, it was around Thanksgiving, we had a court order where we had to release 900 people, I think, on a Monday. And I called the governor's office and briefed them, and pretty soon my phone was ringing, and it was Austin Smith, and he said, the governor wants every single one of these people registered with DUE. I said, by when? Monday. It was Friday afternoon, and I was having a St. Patrick's Day party at my house, and I was trying to prepare for it, and I was like, this is going to be impossible. So I called a friend of mine that wasn't currently in the office, but I knew had the governor's ear. I said, I'm not sure I can do this. He said, you have to. We've talked, and you have to. So now everybody that leaves the Department of Corrections, regardless of where you leave, you're met with a DUE representative, so a workforce representative is there. They register you with DUE, and then they tell you, whatever county you're going back to, this is where you have to go. A couple other things we're doing, and I'll finish up. On a couple days a week in Columbia, we'd like to expand it. A lot of folks are incarcerated. They don't know how to deal with obstacles. They don't deal with them the way, and I'm Irish, and I've got an Irish temper sometimes, but they turn to violence, they turn to anger, they turn to frustration, because that's kind of what, sometimes that's how they've ended up in prison. So a lot of folks that do that, they'll go to DUE, and anytime dealing with a lot of forms and bureaucracy or Department of Motor Vehicles or anything like that, anytime you deal with the government bureaucracy. It's pretty frustrating for me, but it's very frustrating for them if they don't have the proper documentation or they don't know how to ask the right questions. So at DO, we have someone that is there 2 days a week to specifically work with this population. If you're incarcerated, you can go see this person, they understand the challenges, and they understand the second chance employers, which is really important. DMV, we say, look, if you're at the DMV or you're having an incident, please call us. We used to discourage folks from calling back. And Warden Staley, I call her Warden Staley, but now she's Deputy Director. She actually gives them her office number and says, if you're having a problem, give me a call. I'll tell you a quick story on her. So there was a young man who left Manning Correctional. He was trying to get a license. For some reason, he didn't have it. He was having great difficulty. So he called. We had a person that's designed to work with prisoners. We called that person, and they said, okay, where do they live? And they walked him through the process from Columbia to the field office, and he left with the license and was very happy. If she hadn't taken that call, he probably was going to get rearrested because he was frustrated and mad. If he was on any kind of supervision, he was probably coming back to prison. Triple P, real quick, Jerry Adger's doing a great job. He really is. He has decided to change the way we do probation and parole. It used to be 1 to like 300 or 400, I think, which basically is I'm coming to check a box and I'm moving on, and when you get arrested, I'm going to bring you back to prison. They're taking the low-level folks, and they're not going to see them as much because they don't need as much. The high-level folks, they're now changing the number and concentrating them, so they'll be there to make sure that they're doing the right things. I think that about covers, anybody that's an employer in here and wants to hire my folks that are leaving, I would highly encourage you to do that. I would encourage you to look at training credits. I would encourage you to look at tax credits. I would encourage you to look at bonding. I would also encourage you to look at laws that prevent people from being hired. I'll give you an example. So we have a lot of trucking in South Carolina with the port expanding, and anybody that lives near 526 is familiar with all the trucking problems we have. We have a hard time finding truck drivers. So I called the head of the trucking association. I said, hey, will you hire my folks? No, absolutely not. I said, well, they don't have drunk driving offenses or vehicular homicide or anything like that. They're in for a nonviolent offense. No, I won't do it. I said, well, why? Well, it'll come into court. So I called a friend of mine who represented a bunch of trucking companies. He said, yeah, one of the first things a plaintiff's attorney will ask is, what are your crimes? And that will come in. And they won't hire because the insurance companies won't insure them because that's going to come into a ledger. It makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense to do that. I mean, we're preventing someone. There's a lot of barriers that we've put up over years. I'll give you an example of one that we've knocked down. We have students through a Pell Grant at Evans Correctional who are at Northeastern Tech. And they're going to get their technical college degree. And I think we had 11 of them that were on the dean's list. Guess what? We're never going to see those folks again in prison. They're never going to be at a cost of $20,000 a year or more. When you get older, the population's getting older and it's a lot more expensive. We can get these folks in education, get them stabilized, and give them the support when they leave. It's good for the taxpayers, it's good for public safety. If you have an interaction with law enforcement, think of the cost that we associate costs and we look at costs. I know Pete looks at costs and Pete looks at data. And this is all, and all this stuff with these folks being under parole and probation, this is because Pew came in and looked at the data, and that's what they're doing again. And it's tremendous. I mean, 7 institutions, and we're looking at more closing, population down by 14%. It's incredible. So they have an interaction with law enforcement. That's time for law enforcement that they have to interact with. They have to go to a jail. Then the courts get involved. There's an expense there. So there's a societal cost to the victims that they may have for the rest of their lives. And then when they go to become incarcerated with me, I mean, that's $20,000 a year on average, and if they're there for a long time, that's a lot more expensive to handle these folks. We provide health care. Prisoners are the only ones that are entitled to health care for free in the United States. But as they get older, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, you name it, that's a very expensive population. So wouldn't it be better to get them the services they need before they come to prison? But when they do come to prison, just remember, 85, 5, and you. Again, who do you want sitting next to the person that's going to be at your Thanksgiving table or who you're going to call Thanksgiving morning? I think as a state, we probably want someone that is has a job, is stabilized and has a connection with their family. And for the second chance employers, if there's any employer that says, I just can't find anybody to work, I just can't find anybody to work, if you have a skill that you need, we can train for it. We're training for asphalt, plumbers, welders. I talked with a guy that was a buddy of mine who owns a fence company in Columbia, and he's hired some folks, and he said one of the guys that got out is doing welding for the gas in Texas. I think he's making $150,000 a year. So, and I always go back to, I don't know if everybody remembers Three's Company, but how many people remember Three's Company? I'll close on this. Jack Tripper, somebody ordered a very expensive bottle of wine, and what he said was the only people that can afford that are lawyers, doctors, welders, and plumbers. So we're happy to train those folks. So thank y'all very much.